since obviously a lot of people are going to be getting this info later on. Let me a little sunshine in here. All right, it's election day. Election day, everybody. So hopefully you have voted. That's a cute dog there, Jordan. Jordan, Jordyn. People getting creative. Jayson. That is not how I spell my name, but I've seen it. I've seen Jaycen. I've seen it just about all. Any questions as far as the paper? I'm getting a lot of questions about section 3, which is fine. That's the section where you have to be most creative and think the hardest. So I think that's to be expected. Anybody have any questions about number 3? Looks like there's 18 of us, only 2 people. If you can unmute your camera, that would be fantastic, because like I say every single day, it's boring to look at your name when I could at least look at you. Or you could replace your name with a picture of Star Wars for next time, which would at least be interesting to me. All right. Any questions? Any questions? Not seeing any questions. I'm here right now to ask anything specific about part 3 for the paper. Pushed it back to Friday. I made a post this morning about due date, so it's 5 points per day. That it's each day that it's turned in late. If you turn this thing in at midnight or 12:15, we're not going to take 5 points off. But don't wait till then anyway, because that's just not a good idea as far as like how much do you trust a computer with your submission or your grade. So don't wait to the last second. Any questions? Any questions about section 3? Is everybody here pretty good? Yeah, go ahead.
Section 3 is about like anything that you choose regarding like food and like socials. Like I think I heard like one topic was like is forcing our kids to like finish their plate causing them to have like a food eating disorder kind of thing.
One idea we discussed was the Clean Plate Club. You know, there's interesting sociology there because most people know what that is. You could interview people for it. You could talk about why would a family do that? When did that start? I don't know. You could get more specific too. I guess what I'm encouraging people to do is, you know, you don't have to, I'm just encouraging people to be more specific, right? Again, obesity in America, fast food, it's just stuff that feels overdone or huge, probably is. So I'm just trying to suggest that people go a little bit more local, a little bit more specific. I understand that that not everybody's going to be able to talk to somebody, interview somebody, or do something like extremely local. That being said, though, I think that we can get a lot more interesting, and really that's what we want. I mean, for the people grading your papers, for you writing the paper, why write about something that's been done a bajillion times? I just think it would be much more interesting for everybody in regards to that. Now, certainly, if anybody has a topic right now, a potential topic, you can bounce it off me, and then I'm just going to start lecturing. I looked at my wrist, like there's anything there besides some bling. Nope, just bling. Doesn't tell time either. You know, it's 2 minutes past my freckle. I'm sure you've heard that before. All right. I see you flashing me that Star Wars mug. Put it up in front of the camera if you're going to do that. Let's see it. I think that was purposeful. That's right. Woman's place is in the resistance. Yeah, well, excellent. It is. So how do college eating habits affect students' ability to eat healthier? Yeah, college eating habits. I mean, what are those? That would be interesting. Oh, your ability to heat healthier. I'm assuming you mean eat, but that's all good. Yeah, I mean, look at college students' eating habits. What are people eating? Is this I mean, are people in college really elevated with their consciousness about food? I mean, for me, like organic really was just starting to be a thing. But for me, it was like, I didn't have any money. I had $5. We'd go to a bar where you could get 2 beers for $2 a piece, tip the bartender $1, and eat whatever sort of chicken nuggets / whatever thing that they put on some free little buffet, so that you would go to this really lonely bar. And we'd be like, hey, we got 2 beers, then we ate food. So I mean, you know, like ramen, surviving on ramen. I don't know, maybe, but nowadays people are more, honestly, 20 years later, people are way more heightened and enlightened when it comes to food in college. That doesn't mean that people eat better. Oh my gosh. But who knows? So yeah, you can do something with college eating habits. Dumpster diving for sure. I mean, freeganism. I love words. That's right. Getting your food for free, freeganism or dumpster diving. I mean, do it. Go out this week and do it. I mean, it's up to you. And I'm not telling you to like break any laws. Jason Downing would never tell you to break a law. I mean, I will break plenty of them for you, so you don't have to. Don't worry. Yeah, I love anything to do with dumpster diving or getting your food. You know, maybe. I mean, some people dumpster dive because they have to. What about people who choose to do that because they feel it's a conscious or socially right thing? All those seems interesting. Writing about food within the prison system. Does anybody here know about food and the prison system? Exactly. That's why it's a good topic. I like that. I have no idea what they could be feeding these people. I mean, what do you think? If the government's willing to lock up kids in cages and separate them from their families and don't give them blankets or hygiene tools, what do you think they're feeding those people? I mean, I don't know. So that sounds interesting as well. And I mean, if people are in prison and they're fed really subpar, why do we think that people who are in prison deserve subpar food? Why do we think that kids? I mean, they could have the same contract as the Pooter School District. Literally, prisons could have the same food contract as a school district. Then as a sociologist, I'm like, come to daddy. You know, like bring me something interesting. So anyway, yeah. All right. Any other questions about potential topics as Storm gets up to feed and water the chickens this morning? We have 60 new babies. Did I tell everybody here that our babies before got eaten or like attacked? I got 60 new babies. They're growing up now. They look tremendous. They're the most tremendous chickens ever. Sorry. I could do my Obama too. Like when he hit that 3-pointer the other day and he's like, oh, that's what I'll do. That's right. That's just what I'll do. I'll score threes everywhere. All right. I want to do something about food allergies, but I'm not sure what specifically. You know, why do we have such an uptick of food allergies, of people that can't eat food that the system is putting out? I think that doesn't just lie with the individual, it lies with institutions. That seems really interesting to me. Food insecurity. Food insecurity in the US is an example of one of those topics that's like way too big, but reel that sucker in a little bit, right? And talk about what is food insecurity? Interview some people that have families. What's that mean to people? What's it look like to be food insecure in Fort Collins? Now there, you not to know where your next meal is coming from in a town that's quite wealthy. I mean, to me, that is an interesting piece of social. That's an exact way to go and get more specific, right? Yep. Does sugar as an addition affect the brain? Sound like a good idea. Maybe like the impact of highly refined sugars on our diets is we know that, right? Obesity, diabetes, things like that. If we could look at maybe something a bit more interesting with highly processed sugars or maybe one thing I thought was interesting is when the high fructose corn syrup people, Jason, they're not high fructose. There are. There's a company that sells high fructose corn syrup and they pay for those ads a few years ago. Do you remember those? It was like a boyfriend and a girlfriend sitting on a blanket. And she's like, do you want a popsicle? And he's like, is it high fructose corn syrup? And she's like, yes, and that's okay. It's like a very awkward, sexy, not sexy, very awkward moment that no one would experience in real life. So to me, what about those companies? And how come if they know their product is dangerous, what about their attempts to still sell people on those products? To still get people to ingest products. I don't know. There's still people out there trying to sell asbestos. No shit. So for real, sorry, but there is. It's like, what? Yeah. So I think that there are some of those moments that are like, and those are the moments that I love in sociology. So anyway, all right. We'll move on. We've talked about this a lot. It's due on Friday. I put up that thing that said an announcement this morning. I would rather get a paper on Saturday or Sunday and have you lose 5 or 10 points than turn in something by the deadline that's rushed. You know, like if it doesn't meet the requirements, you're going to lose 5 or 10 points or more anyway. I mean, it's, so without a doubt, just make sure that you turn in a solid paper that does a little bit more. Now I know when I say that, I'm going to look at we're going to look at, however many hundreds of papers between these two classes, 150 and 250, 400. I'm good at adding. And 400 papers, 300 some people will do minimum or barely enough. There will be a handful of people that will do more. And I don't subscribe to the fact that you're competing with everybody in this class, because that whole competition piece in this culture is sick of it. But the reality is, doing a little bit more for yourself always turns out good. So not to compete with other people, but the reality is, such a small amount of people over my 13 years teaching, I'm always like, wow, percentage wise, do you want to know the breakdown? The people who come to me after exam one are the people that got a 96. The people that are like, need to write a little extra are like halving the work. Don't do it. Just take some time this week, write a little bit more, and it does matter. Yeah, you do a little extra, people notice. It's impossible to say that they don't. Come on. All right, feeling feisty this morning. It's election day. I already voted, though. I'm good. I voted a week ago, so I'm all good. Book about milk. Okay, good. All right. So you're sorting that out on the side. Excellent. Well, any last questions? Look, get on top of this discussion. There's only a few people that have joined in. Get on top of the Jane Elliott piece. I had the pleasure of working with Jane, meeting her twin sister, and wow, you want to talk about somebody leading the resistance? That's Jane Elliott. Love her. So watch that. It's a really interesting discussion. I know everybody's working on the paper, so there's that going on too. But you got to post your first post by Friday, Dizzle. So you might as well do that early, right? Easy points. Okay. Let me move on I'm going to start with a couple questions. I'm going to start, and I'm going to screen share here in a minute, this chapter. So let's pop this up. I'll screen share, and then I'm going to undo that in a second just to look at the other things, but that's all right. Okay. All right. Here we go. So chapter 9, can everybody see that? Make sure everybody see that. Does anybody know the guys in the middle? I asked my class this yesterday, and nobody, not a single 150 person, knew. So your pop culture, your history folks, you're gonna have to, improve that game. But anybody who's in the middle? Two very famous individuals. One ridiculously famous, particularly considering the time and who he was hanging out with at the time. What do you think? Anybody? No, it looks like blanks this morning. All right. On the right is Carol O'Connor. Carol was Archie in the series Archie Bunker. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of series that dealt with race. The late 70s had so many awesome TV shows, and I'm talking pre-Huxtable, I'm a doctor in a great sweater, pre all of that, and talking about Sanford and Son and Jeffersons and Good Times and Archie Bunker. If you want to talk about the actual mass media reaching people with messages of race that were really interesting and pretty righteous, go watch some of these shows. It's so bizarre to me that TV, that we just backed off of race. Can we just not have TV shows about it? And can we not talk about it? And then that dips for a long time. And maybe in the last few years, Blackish, or there's a few shows that kind of deal with that. But when I was growing up, it was big time. And who's to the left? You all should be embarrassed. Sammy Davis Jr. Now, Sammy Davis Jr., one of the most amazing entertainers. He's one of the right-hand man, right, of the Rat Pack. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. These guys were, well, literally gangsters because of the mob support they had. But one of the, most tight-knit partying crew that you've ever seen, that this country's ever seen. And with Sammy Davis Jr. in that group during a time where you're still talking about segregation, schools, you can't even go to schools together, and he's a super high-profile figure. Anyway, interesting piece of history there. And so anyway, all right, a little bit on that. Is our choice to cast a vote for a particular candidate purely a personal decision? We have percentages who voted for Obama in 2012. My son showing me the other day 3 or 4 times how Obama hit a 3-pointer on his way off the court the other day, which you've probably seen by now. And being a basketball fan, I loved it. I loved it when we had a president that was into basketball. All right, so is this choice purely a personal decision? Is it connected to race? How is it connected? See, Hispanic American, African American, non-Hispanic whites. As we look at an election now, that's 8 years ago. Wow, that's time flying. All right. Another question for you early in the morning. Who are these individuals? You're making me feel old. Who do I need to put up there that you would recognize today? I don't even know. So these two guys, who's on top? Anybody? The news has been talking to this guy non-stop over the last year and really over the last many years. Anybody? All right. Brother, Dr. Cornel West. This is a guy that if you're interested in race relations, you need to go out there right now and go to Facebook of all places and look at his Facebook page and listen to him speak like he's everything he speaks is poetry. It's like the way he talks is solid poetry, and it's all super righteous, really interesting stuff. And on the bottom, are you going to go 0 for 3 this morning? Come on, Soch 100. He's a sociological hero to all of us nerds. Anybody? All right, Howard Zinn. Now, you've probably heard of a book called A People's History of the United States. That's a book that Howard Zinn wrote, which is actually a history of the United States instead of all the history books that were released for decades and decades and decades that had history that actually didn't happen in the United States. So if you want a really great comprehensive piece, read A People's History of the United States, listen to Cornel West. Does race matter? And how much does race matter to you? Now I'm going to re-pull up Top Hat. I'm going to look at it. I could probably screen share that too, but I'm just going to read these. So where are we? How does race matter to you? 11 yes and 6 no. And then let me see. The question was, does race matter to you and how much does race matter to you? 7 people, a ton. Some not very much, 3 and 2, and then not at all, 5. So we're dipped at the ends and really split evenly, even for this many people. Let's double them, right? Then it's 14 to 10. Doubled between not at all and very much. So why did you answer the way that you answered? Like, why does or why doesn't race matter to you? How much did you say race matters? What do you think? I'm going to open this up. I know it's early. I've been going for about 18 minutes here, but you know this class is based on discussion. So especially during this chapter, which by the way is my favorite chapter. This is the chapter on race and ethnicity is hands down the thing that I love to teach the most. So let's discuss it. What do you think? How much does race matter? Does race matter to you at all? What do you think?
I feel like this is such a broad question. Like, you're not, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, let's say if I, like, walked into a doctor's office and the people who were working there were African American or just any other race besides white. In that case, I would not care because I know that they're, like, licensed medical professionals. I don't care what race they are. But if you were talking about, do I just care about race in general, I believe, yes, that's more of a broader example. Right. And I feel like that needs to be addressed more than just like, I guess.
Good. Yeah. No, excellent. You know me, I'm vague on purpose. I'm trying to get to the bottom of some sociological stuff that I think is interesting. So I'm okay with you interpreting it that way. I think it's more interesting than always having me like lead people down the exact corridor. So good. All right. What else?
I just wanted to add something. Eva, I appreciate what you added. And while I can agree and appreciate where you're coming from, I kind of interpret those as the same thing, right? So for the most part, like if you look at the health field, right, it's predominantly white. And as a Black woman, if you think about like them going into labor, right, they have the highest risk of like losing their life and the pregnancy during childbirth. So, a lot of that is institutionalized racism, right? And a lot of systemic things that's going on there. So to me, interpreting that question is that it does matter even when I don't want it to or when I don't think about it. And just to also add on to answer the question in general, so I was born in Nigeria. So the first 5-6 years of my life, like I didn't think about race, right? Because everybody looked like me. Like obviously there wasn't any like white folks in Africa, right? Or the part that I was in. So it wasn't something that I often had to think about. But then growing up in the US, it was different. I was like, oh, I'm like, I knew I was Black, obviously, but it wasn't a big deal until like people are like, oh, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's prominent when you're the only like Black girl in like a class full of like 30 people, right? Or even just take CSU as example. Like I think the most Black kids in my class is like 3 or something, right? So race is always something that's there, even when I don't want to think about it. It's always in the back of my head, regardless of what situation I'm in.
Yeah. Awesome and important. And, here's really, I don't know, have I said this before? I think I have. If we really want to know what the experience is like in this country or in any country for people who identify as gender female, we need to listen. If we want to know what the experience is like for a person of color in this country or anywhere else, the best thing to do is to listen. So for me, that's why I love these discussions, because it's not about jumping on and adding a point. Yeah, but for all of us here, and we've all done such a great job, it's really about listening. To me, that seems, and how do you, is it Bolu?
Yes, Bolu.
Bolu. So my thought is, I have so many thoughts. My thought is I can't even imagine that. I can't even imagine having that be the case for 5 years and then coming here and just being like, this is absolutely 180 degrees or 360 degrees or whatever that could be, different in ways for sure. When I ask this question, normally I walk around a classroom and I purposely pick people in dominant culture for the first few. And I say, what is your race? What does race mean to you? What is your race, Matt? What's your race mean to you? I don't know. Next one. I don't know. So you got to imagine me walking around a room of 150 people. And then I purposely pick a couple people of color within there. And what does race matter to you? And this is just my experience over 13 years, almost every single time. And there are a few people in dominant culture that have an answer. Means my heritage, or it means I've got some privilege. But for the most part, the majority, meaning I would say, and this is like me guessing over years and years and years, 60% to 70% of dominant culture respondents are like, not much, or I don't know. And so what we have to understand is that if you can answer that question and say, I don't know, or not much, then that's a privilege, right? Because we understand that there's people, whether you're born here, whether you're born in another country, whatever that might be, like Baloo was explaining, that you are aware as a person of color every single day, every single moment in your life in the background that is the case. And that's why we're examining, like, not just that you're aware of that, but what does that really mean in sociological terms? Not just, and we can go with like life chances, the stuff that I love, that's sociology, that's kind of vague, but we can also go to, if you are a person who's African-American, if you're having a baby in the hospital, here's what that looks like. And it is much, much, much different just based on that, right? So we're going to talk about that throughout this chapter. Now, of course, we all know race matters, but how much it matters and what we have determined as a society, as a culture for the last 200 plus years, that is predetermined, right? So when people say, I wish we're all the same, or I was colorblind, or race didn't matter, the reality is that's like a nice thought, but it matters not because we want it to today, but because people who've been reinforcing that for the last, since this country was made, right? And of course we understand that race relations became much more complicated after a while in this country, once poor whites were given the chance to own a bit of land and be on slave patrols and feel just a tiny bit better than people of color, although still largely for their life expectancy and chances and things like that in the very same boat. All right, let's back it up here. So describe what comes to mind when you hear the word race in a few words. Racism, diversity, people from different backgrounds and cultures, injustice, systemic oppression, privilege, shared physical qualities, the evolution of Homo sapiens, how we evolved from monies. I assume you mean monkeys. Groups of people who originate from different places and have different physical traits. Ancestral origin, diversity, the color of someone's skin, physical features, a measurement that contributes to the unnecessary division within some cultures, and inequality. Okay, so now it's much different if and I think I might have asked that later, but no, I haven't asked it yet, I don't think. But what comes to mind when we hear the word ethnicity? We're going to spend the first part of this chapter on race, but when people describe ethnicity versus race, what comes to mind? These lists are very different, right? And so we're going to talk about the difference, because people say, you know, drugs and alcohol, we know that's crap, right? We know that drug and alcohol is a drug. Oftentimes, though, we also lump race and ethnicity into the very same like sentence, though those things are quite different, right? All right, so let me go back and screen share here. And hold on, what do we race with? Before I do that, I have a good question. Race relations, describe race relations in America in 2020. Now we know that this is going to be an intense list. But again, this is nothing new historically, right? I mean, honestly, we treat it like it's new because it's new for our experience. But if we look back in time, and I said it's very important when we do the social class to have an idea of past, now-ish, and present. When we look back, we'll see that many of these same tactics, many of the exact same things that are happening today that seem new and that brown folks are experiencing are very much the same as what has happened before. So that being said, it's election day, just happened to be starting the chapter on race. I would say that like the reasons that we describe race relations like I'm about to read, and I haven't read this list yet. Let me preface that. I haven't read the list. Do we know what we're going to hear? I think we have a collective idea of what, I know anyway. I think you know too. So let's look at this and then we'll talk about it. Tense, messy. Personally, I don't see racism, never participated or been a part of it my entire life. Better than they were in the 60s, not where they should be. Unjust, failure, a hot mess, unsatisfactory treatment and opportunities. Trouble, very unequal with problems caused in power. Very big conflict happening right now with the election coming soon. Blown away that people still deny that white supremacy exists. Society indoctrinates white Americans into racist ideology our whole lives, but somehow we insist we're not racist. Bullshit. The first step to ending racism is being able to come to terms with our own implicit biases, or biases, yes. Strained, brutal, unfair. So my question to you is, why? Or if you didn't answer on that list, because there's a lot more students that aren't using Top Hat in this class, describe race relations in 2020, and why did you answer that way? Why do we think that race relations right now, like in the moment, are where we're at? Why do you think that this list is where we're at, or why did you answer in the way that you answered? Go ahead. I'm gonna have a sip of my coffee.
So I think that things are the way they are right now because, first of all, incidents of violence against people of color are being filmed, so we're confronted with it more, those of us who have the privilege of just sort of being oblivious to it. But also because I think collectively we're starting to realize that as people in dominant culture, we can actually perpetuate racist ideologies without meaning to, simply because it's how we've been raised. And in order to stop that, we have to accept the fact that we have implicit biases and that we are inherently racist as a product of how we were raised in a culture of white supremacy. And that's hard to do. So I think a lot of people, because one of the worst things you can say to somebody right now is like, you're racist. And people are like, oh God, no, I'm not, no, I'm not. But I think if we were all able to be like, I am racist because I was raised in a culture of racism and I have to unlearn that. I think that is what's hard for people to do because it feels like saying I'm a terrible person, you know?
Yeah, so many things with just what you just said. So I'll let somebody else go. But yeah, I think those are, all really, really important thoughts. And of course, again, when we talk about this chapter, I say this over and over, but I think it's important because I want you to reinforce this over and over to your friends. So when I say that guilt is something that you feel when you know you haven't done your part, and responsibility is what you take when you know something needs to be done, tell that to your people, right? Tell that to your friends. Because I think that that's a big part. If you're going to talk about race and racism, instantly, people in dominant culture are like, whoa. And of course, Nobody here had a hand in owning slaves. Nobody here was the mastermind of a financial system that would completely leave brown folks out. Like, nobody here is responsible for that. You are, however, responsible for what's going on right now. And so I think that that's, you know, how much responsibility are people going to take? What's that look like? You know, but good. And then the other part you said might be, and we'll get more into that maybe with somebody else's, we're seeing it more. I mean, it's pretty clear, you know? Yeah, okay, who else? State of race relations.
I was just gonna say that I agree with Allie, I think it is. And I was just gonna say because I feel like a lot of people, like how she said, they're not really like admitting to it. So I feel like that's one of the reasons like why it's still like why racism is still around, because people like will try to keep that a secret and people will try to deny that they're racist. And then like everything will kind of go like behind doors. And like I've witnessed like people my age and stuff, like, you know, they're kind of like scared or I guess not confident enough to like tell their friends who are racist or tell their friends who are like, you know, saying messed up stuff or believing messed up stuff. Like they're not really, I don't know, they're not really like pressing their friends about that or like trying to make a difference. So I feel like that's also another reason like why it's still been around, because people aren't really speaking up about it. But I feel like now, definitely nowadays in 2020, like people have been speaking up about it a lot more, like you can see with the riots and things like that. So I feel like that's definitely been an accomplishment for us, but I still feel like there's a lot of like things that need to be done, and I feel like people should speak up more because we've seen that that's what helped us like in the long run.
Uh, Absolutely. Yeah. So, are we willing? Are people willing to challenge their friends and each other about racism? And to me, this is also, as a sociologist, again, this is also a generational thing. You know, like the hallmark when I'm growing up and now with my friends, the hallmark of our friendships were that we could tell each other when we were failing. Like, hey, Downing, that behavior is just, people are not digging that, man. You should try a different way to communicate or whatever that might be. And I think that, I don't know, because I'm not 20. I don't know if people that are 20 or 30 or in their teens are able to get super real with each other, or if we fear that that would somehow ruin a relationship. To me, it's always worth the risk, but that's me. You know, I'm the first person at a family reunion that if your racist uncle says something, I'm the first person to be like, man, that is not the way that life is. But again, not everybody is that personality type as well. Somebody might be really laid back and just not wanting to confront people, but they are very much in support of their friends and inequality, whatever that might be. Yeah. And I think that although this is hidden, I mean, it's not been hidden. You know, I think that it really, racism and our awareness of it, really when Barack Obama was elected, started to, right when people were saying we're post-racial, also, it just lit a fire amongst people that were worried and dominant culture folks. And now I would say all of that in the last 4 years, I'm not sure how much of it is hidden at all. I mean, the president is clearly racist. The people that he has working in the White House, Stephen Miller is an actual white supremacist, and Steve Bannon, actual white supremacists. They are putting out actual white supremacist propaganda and making sure, and it's not a dog whistle. A dog whistle's quiet. When you say that there are good people on both sides and continue to pound that and say, hey, white women in suburbia, why don't you love me? You should. I'm going to keep brown people out of your neighborhoods. That's as overtly and basically, that's the definition of basic racism. Now, am I hammering the president? Look, the words are coming out of your own mouth. We can see them, we can hear them, and we can discuss them as adults, and clearly much of it is racist. And I don't think that, I clearly think that we need to look at the circumstances too. Look at that generation. I mean, no offense, but, and I'm not giving this person an out, but that was like fairly typical, you know? And so of course, when that behavior is reinforced and then normalized, it becomes very, very, very dangerous. So I would say we're in an area that I never thought I would have to live through with all the work that people did in the 60s and 70s, how real it was growing up in my experience. I didn't think that we'd be sort of back at what seemed like square one. Though I think a lot of people have said in this class and acknowledged that things are better than 100 years ago, right? So kind of how do we grasp that? How do we process that? How do we deal with overt racism, racist policies coming right out of the government? And again, this isn't a party line thing. This country has had decades and decades and decades and decades and decades to knowingly shore up and make less the systemic inequality. We have failed to do so. And I think that a lot of that is just that concept that maybe people in dominant culture can just pretend that racism doesn't exist. I don't know. Or can just say that's not racist and leaves me stunned. But of course, that's just such a big thing. Good. All right. So politics. Oh, filming. What about filming of it? Do we feel like it's so much more overt because we see so much more of it than we would have? You know, sociology is linked with CRJ, Criminal Justice Department, and I think body cameras have been well received by both police departments and communities as a way to hold police accountable. That being said, right, it's still happening and still happening more and more and more and more and more. Yeah. Yep, and yes, the racial color blindness, right? And this is something that Jane Elliott would say that I've heard people say before. Look, unless you are legitimately colorblind, oops, sorry, getting some darkness here, you're not colorblind. And even if you're colorblind, you're not colorblind to human beings. We recognize race, we're programmed to see it, we do see color, and so if somebody says, I just don't see color, everybody's the same, Jane Elliott would often, or somebody might say, there's blue people, purple people, white people, red people, I don't care, I don't see color. And of course, Jane Elliott's like, people don't come in the shades of blue and purple, sit your ass down, you certainly do see color, right? And we've been programmed for how we see color as well. So yeah, the idea of color blindness or the notion of us being in a post-racial society, not the case whatsoever. And certainly heading in that direction is more of that denial piece rather than the responsibility piece that we're talking about. Jane Elliott sounds like my hero. She's mine. And if you spend even, well, you watched the Blue-Eyed, Brown-Eyed piece right after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And she's amazing there, but then watch her work with adults. She used to go on Oprah all the time. And you know, people want their Oprah experience. I mean, they want to be loved by Oprah. And she'd get on there and they'd make the blue-eyed people sit in a waiting room and they'd turn the heat up and they wouldn't give them any presents. And by the time they got out, man, these people were pissed. And she just boom, boom, like just left and right with what these people were saying. And she's tough, you know, and that's how she gets her point across. And we'll talk about at the end of this chapter, race relations and communication and deprogramming racism. It's very difficult. Okay, her tough style of just do it or don't and get with it or don't does not work with everybody by any means. And we're going to learn that actually to deprogram racism is a really hard, long, and convoluted, although it can be done, process, right? All right, so let me get back here to a screen share and let's see, yeah, there we are. And there we go. Okay. So describe race. We did that. All right. If people define their situation as real, if people define their situations as real, they are real in their consequences. So there are some historical figures of people here that I would say are subpar human beings. I'm going to cast that judgment. And then there's some more recent ones. That's right. That would be CSU students last semester, right in the middle there, doing the Wakanda Forever, painting their face black, posting about it. And then if you saw the students' rebuttal, you'd be even further dismayed and embarrassed. But unfortunately, CSU is a campus where we experience this every year. Go ahead and Google Colorado State racism, Colorado State University racism. Year and a half ago, it was two Native American guys, like teenagers who were in and they're walking, taking a tour of the campus. There's a Karen that's in that campus tour as well. She calls the campus police on them. They get pulled out of that tour. I mean, who joins a campus tour for fun Like, nobody talked about that 2 years ago. Is there any human being that wants to go sit in on one of those campus tours? Like, you know what? I'm going to sneak into one of those tours. No, never happened to me in the history of humankind. Then a paper towel noose hung outside a person of color 2 or 3 years ago. Look, don't be these people in the middle here. Okay? In your life today, don't ever be these people in the middle. All right? And I know that's harsh, but really what this means is we could say racism doesn't exist, but if people make it so, then it is so. And you can't deny the existence of it. If you, over time, don't loan to people of color so that they can buy homes, or you redline, then the reality that they can't own homes it's a reality. Even if all of the racism in the world is propped up on the tiniest little shred of any sort of truth whatsoever, which it's not, which means that we know that we can dismantle it and tear it down. Even if it's all bullshit, it's real for people, right? Even if the whole notion of it is a hot mess, it manifests itself in real ways. And people of color know this. And I think a lot of us in dominant culture know this as well. All right, so questions that we would ask. Race and ethnicity, what are they? How are they created by society? Why does the United States have so much racial and ethnic diversity? My question on top of this would be, how come we have so much racial and ethnic diversity and yet still struggle so mightily with the concept, of equality or of diversity or of inclusion? How are race and ethnicity important dimensions of social inequality today, and who are disadvantaged and who are dominant? Now, just because I say dominant, that doesn't mean, like, look, my parents, teachers, my dad, white, blah, 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 right? It doesn't mean that they still didn't have negative dollars in their bank account. That's because I'm talking about dominant culture, the color of your skin, doesn't mean that you've had everything handed to you, but it means that you have unearned privileges that other people of other colors and shades do not have, right? And we know that the same is true with gender. Sorry, it's getting so dark here because the clouds came over. But we understand that this is a historical piece and that it makes a tremendous difference in the now and in people's lives. All right, so let's skip over that. What is race? Oh, look at that. Look at Chewbacca. I say, old man. He looks like he's about to go get himself a sniffed of whatever. Anyway, like, I just have this here because it's like, what is race? Like, if I'm just on this planet, maybe there's different races. That's like my mindset. But if I'm in Star Wars land, or we're in a real universe here, then race is like humans, the human race, and race is like Wookiees, right? And race would also be like these crazy little green aliens dropping beats. That's right? But like, the notion is, what is it? How do we even come to this place where we call humans aliens? Right? And we get locked into ideas that are many generations long about racial superiority. Okay, how does that happen? So let's define it.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think that it's so funny how people will call, like, Hispanics aliens when white people literally stole this land. Like, you're not even supposed to be here. I'm so confused how they're aliens. Like, that doesn't even make any sense.
Look, let's just say it right now. I'm sorry. Maybe it's just Tuesday morning. It's all full of shit. All of that notion for so many years that, like, certain people can do no wrong and certain people are fully human and other people are not. Look, own it. If you feel that way, it's deplorable. If you've made it policies that way that affect other human beings that way, it's ridiculous, right? Because, and what a great point, none of us from Europe belong here. Believe it or not, people were here before us. I know. Isn't that crazy? Sorry, I'm so snarky this morning. And when this country went into Africa, I think around World War I, and we sat down in a room with France and England and representatives from all these countries, and we split up Africa. Like, as if there were no people living there. That's why South Africa was owned by the English, and part of it was owned by the French, and part of it was, the thought that Europeans are, the manifest destiny idea, or the idea that, those folks, I don't know. I don't get it either. And I just, yeah, I second that. Bizarre. But if we're looking at the history of race and ethnicity and how people have constructed this, a lot of it is bizarre and built, like I said, on a foundation of non-reality. So it is real, though, if its consequences are. Race is a foundation of identity and a basis for social inequality. I like that. You know, not everything associated with race has to be negative. It's not at all. So a foundation of identity. There can be an important piece there and certainly a basis for social inequality. So race, a socially constructed category of people who share biological transmitted traits that members of a society consider important. As a sociologist, and maybe you've already watched, I'm kind of lecturing a bit over top of what I have before. If you watched my other lectures, I don't mean to be redundant, but I think this piece here is interesting, and that is that members of a society consider important. This is why, folks, sorry, trying to lighten it up with magic. This is why, folks, reverse racism isn't a thing that matters. Now, it matters to you if somebody, a person of color, lays into you and really lays into you. That might hurt your feelings. But the whole point is that members of a society consider important. Who are those members that made those rules? Not brown folks. And so therefore, reverse racism isn't an impactful thing because people of color do not have a proportionate share of power to enforce it in any way. People of color aren't suddenly going to be like, oh, now you can't get a loan. Oh, now you can't, right? The race card? That doesn't exist. People who say the race card, there's no magic card that a black or brown person can pull out and be like, race card. And then suddenly people in the White House are like, oh, you win. You win. We never saw that coming. Like, the race card isn't a thing because people who are in a minority status do not have a proportionate share of the power to determine things that dominant cultures determine to be considered important. Okay. I don't want to get too animated here this morning, but it's reality. And I think that it's good for us in the social sciences to be like, this is reality, this is not, here's misperception, here's how we can look at that misperception and what impact does that have. That's our job as sociologists. So race refers to socially defined people, generally considered distinct, and that could be in a biological way. There is a small biological component to race, for sure, right? So, good test question. The concept of race has two components. What are they? Social and physical. So, group identity, people must be recognized in some ways as being distinct, having some characteristics, and they've got that social recognition, right? And without it, it won't be identified as race. And then there are some physical characteristics, right? Every race is generally regarded as being somehow different in appearance from other races. Again, as set forth by people in European descent and dominant culture. But again, let's pop down there, and I know it's cut off at the bottom, but it is a social choice to define what differences matter and how much. And these were choices that were made that impacted policies, that had votes, that set forth the institutions that still function in our society and our culture today. But it's really easy here to know why people display racial characteristics, right? Migration. You know, where are you living in the world for how long? And how much sun are you getting or not getting? Are you in Norway and are you in Sweden? Are you wearing a lot of clothes? Are you at the equator? Because we understand that people living near the equator have more melanin. It's the pigment that gives skin its color, and the more melanin you have, the more it protects you from the harsh effects of the sun, right? People living near the equator that have darker skin are more protected. People like me that are from Ireland that have red hair and freckles, and I'm burning right now. The sun just came out from behind a cloud, and I better put some sunscreen on in 2 seconds or I'm in danger. And I'm not kidding about that. So it depends where you were. Changes throughout the year in non-equatorial populations, migrations, and certainly, I mean, what kind of food are you eating, right? How much light are you getting? How much vitamin D and calcium? What does regional cloud cover look like? And are you in a place where you're going to have to wear a lot of clothing all the time? You know, and so the rays of the sun are not going to be getting to you in the ways that they might be for other folks. So we put so much weight in that, yet it carries very little weight. So we think of race as biological or genetic, and I know people do, because we hear about that all the time. The president was just in Minnesota a couple weeks ago praising them for their good genes. What do you think he means in Minnesota? I lived in Minnesota. It's mighty white, okay? He means you have a good history of genetic makeup of whiteness. That's what people mean when they say that. But of course, we can't even agree on how many races there are. Maybe 3, maybe 34, maybe more. Race classifications change from time to time. They're always variable, place to place. And look, if we're just going to talk about people mating, long-term interbreeding makes the notion of a pure race in a biological sense completely meaningless. We're there already. So what's the point? The point is, from a biological point of view, knowing a person's racial category that they themselves or you try and put in a box allows us to predict nothing about them. Nothing. Right? So race carries a lot of weight, but yet a lot of it is only real in the ways that we make it real, in social ways. So as a sociologist, how do we see it? Something that is fluid, it's always changing, you know that. Something that is invented by Europeans in the 18th century. We've come to see race as fixed and universal, but it is not. It is just as fluid and as changing as anything else. And of course, look, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So once we learn to see a certain number of races, we only see those races. That's just like that habit energy, that mental formation piece, right? And again, what does it matter? Well, it matters for everything here. It matters on how we perceive people, how we reward people, how we punish them, how long they're going to live, what their quality of life is like in the meantime, and certainly as a justification for discrimination. And it's really about, what characteristics we choose to pay attention to. And you know me, right? When I would get these things, what do you think I filled out for race? Yes, I always wrote the word human in the box. Right? Of course, it never made sense to me. So how are we going to classify people? It doesn't mean that census taking isn't important. It is. But in regards to how we're talking about the social construction of race, what box do we put ourselves in? What box will we be put in? Why? Is that a gender box? Is that a race box? Is that an age box? What is that, and what impact does it have on our life? First thing we need to know about scientific racism is that there's nothing scientific about it. There you go. In the 18th century, physical attributes became part of the definition of race because you've got to find a way to rank people, right? And they're ranking people not just like stratification, like how much money you make. They're ranking people according to their stages of evolution. Like, that is some brutal, brutal stuff right there. Right? So being able to look at a picture and say, see here, the top picture is this is a person of European descent. They are very human. In between, we have something that's more animal-like. That's our modern Negroid. And this is what they would be saying. And then down here is a chimpanzee or an ape. And so you can see how close people are. They just haven't evolved into as human of a person or a thing as other people. Again, look, whether that history is embarrassing or just awful or not, it makes an impact on people's lives today, in this very moment. Do not read this now. You can read it later, and I'm going to go ahead. These were turned into PDFs. I'll make sure to upload the actual file so that none of the writing, none of the typing gets lost. Some of it got lost when it got reformatted, apparently, this summer when I was working on this. It's just a justification again. Skull type, phrenology, measuring people's skulls, being able to look at somebody's face or skull type and saying, this is what a criminal looks like. Look, we're talking about white supremacy. We're talking about Nazi stuff. We're talking about racial superiority. And this is coming again from people with a lot of power, because these people are doctors and they work at universities and they're publishing these things in medical journals. So even though all of it is completely garbage, it also cemented itself in our culture, and we're still trying to undo these things today, right? So, Human Genome Project is going to disappoint these people on the bottom of this slide, because genetically all human beings are nearly identical. There's less than 0.01% of the total gene pool contributes to racial differences. So the notion of a pure race is fanciful, right? It's something that doesn't exist. So then we have to ask ourselves, if there's really only 0.01 of the total gene pool that contributes to these differences, how come people are trying so hard to make it seem otherwise? I mean, as a sociologist, the question in my head then is, well, why? Why would you put so much time, energy, money, resources to oppress people based on something that is 0.01 arbitrary? I don't know. It doesn't get much more arbitrary than that, does it? And you know me, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to joke. I'm not a math guy, but I can get that this means literally nothing when we talk about differences, okay? So race science is not correct, of course, at all. People are more physiologically similar than different, with physical traits varying more within a racial category than between them. So no particular gene or gene links, sorry, that's gene to link to race. And we know that it is used to support and lead to discrimination, and we redefine it, and we define it because of power. All right, we're gonna get to your ethnicity. And let me look back here at these questions really quick, see if we can, I'm gonna stop the screen share and I'm gonna go back here, and I think it's good that I narrate everything I click, right? That's helpful to everyone. Okay, which has a more positive connotation, race or ethnicity? Now, 0 people said race, 15 people said ethnicity. When we get an agreement level like that, again, I'm like, oh, why? What do you think? I'm gonna let you talk for a minute. Sorry, I just saw, as a current tour guide for CSU, you'd be surprised. Yes, I suppose. There's people that sit in on my classes that aren't really going to CSU, but you know, I'm gonna say that that's not a thing that happens all the time anyway. But yeah, go ahead. Why do you think, I mean, 15 to 0. It might as well be 85, 87 people in this class to 0, or whatever that might be. What do you think?
I think ethnicity has been like sexualized a little bit as well, where it's like cool to be ethnic or a little bit different, but race is more like black and white, and people think like, oh, this is where you're from, this is the class system, etc. But when people are like, oh yeah, I'm ethnic, I think in media it's like, oh, you're like, you know, sexy and exotic.
Right. Okay, good. Why else? Or what else? As far as the positive or negative connotations of race or ethnicity.
Sorry. So like ethnicity like directly correlates more to like religion and culture and like languages. And so I feel like those are something that a lot of more people like celebrate. And so there's like more positive reinforcement around ethnicity more than there is race.
Yeah, good. Why else? No one sees me without glasses. You're the first. Oh. Can't even handle that.
I think some people are so afraid of being called racist that they don't even want to mention race itself, so they say ethnicity because it feels safer.
Good. Yeah. Overwhelmingly, people think race, the word race, term race, has a direct link to racism, not just because it's part of the word, but we've learned to associate that. Yeah. Baloo said ethnic groups are more tied to cultural traditions. Definitely. Right. Once we get into ethnicity, now we're starting to look at different pieces here.
I'd like to kind of share my own experience as well. So in Nigeria, right, obviously we didn't focus on race, but we focused on ethnic groups, or like, I guess, different tribes. That's what we call them. So like, I think reflecting back on like the 2 countries that I kind of represent, I guess you can say, the race situation that's going on in the US, it's very similar to the ethnic and tribal wars that are going on in Nigeria. Which is kind of really interesting to kind of see the parallel between the 2. So yeah, I don't know, just my 2 cents there.
Awesome. Good way to distinguish in a different way, I think, too. Anybody else? Well, they certainly do carry a great deal different of weight, to be sure. And different ways that we have used them historically as well. All right, good. Well, we'll talk about ethnicity and jump into that piece next time. Any questions before we leave about anything today? I will not be here on Thursday, but but I do have, I believe my lecture's up for this chapter. Although I really want to continue this discussion. We'll do it next Tuesday for sure. And we'll keep plugging away at it. Yep. Any other questions before we end today? Sorry that I'm ahead of time that I'm going to miss. I know that I just got to get home, help my dad with some stuff. And of course, it looked like it was going to be 60 to 70 degrees the whole time. And then I looked yesterday, and now all of a sudden when I'm supposed to be driving back on Sunday and Monday through Nebraska, it's 6 inches of snow and 30 degrees. That's why I don't go back all that often. I thought I picked a good window. Nebraska. I'm sure it'll be all through Iowa too. So maybe I'll leave a little early and try and get back here Sunday or Monday, but I will definitely be around for our class Tuesday. I will be around all week until then. So please reach out if you have any questions about the paper. Again, I would rather you turn in a paper that's 5 points off for being a day late, that is solid and meets all the requirements. Yua, do you have anything else to add or anything about that? No? Okay. Any questions?
I wanted to bounce this idea off of you. I typed it earlier in the chat, but I know we were having like other conversations and stuff, but I think I'm gonna do the problem with the food system and foster care.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
I read with the food they supply in foster care, it can lead to further issues, whether it's a lack of food or I'm gonna look more into it, but it seemed really interesting to me.
Yeah, my parents actually had 2 foster kids because they tried for 6 years to have me, and I know that that's a really interesting topic all the way around. I'd be interested to look at that: food, nutrition, fostering families, things like that. Yeah, interesting. All right, anybody back? Anybody back? Anybody back? All right. So do your duty if you are of age to vote. Make sure that you vote. And then I would say, my dad said, well, we probably won't know for a month who the president is. And I said, why? We've always known before that there's going to be a lot of violence. I said, why? It's supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be filled with law and order. So be safe, okay? There will be people that will be harassing people at polling sites. That's illegal. If you're denied a chance to get in and vote, you can ask for a provisional ballot, which is your right, even if you're standing in line at that moment. So make sure that that you use your positivity and your peaceful attitude and everything, because obviously we've been prepping for this all semester long. I've been getting emails after emails after emails. People have been preparing, well, for years, really, for this election day. It seems to be already so many more millions of people, tens of millions more have voted early. We've never had so many questions, and the government's never put so many things out there about would your vote be counted, or would a post office be able to do that? I mean, just so many kind of small things. But just, go vote and do that, do your part, and be good people and do good things. And who knows, the next time we meet, we might know that there's a different president or not. We're certainly going to know the results of some, I think, these very important things: paid leave for families, things like that we're voting on in Colorado. There's some really important things going on the federal level. Each state has some really interesting things. So yeah, vote, be safe. And is the number, let's be real. This administration admitted last week that they gave up on trying to control COVID. That doesn't mean that you have to. Be a responsible human being that has empathy for your brothers and sisters. Mask up, take care of each other, and do what you can, because we don't have to surrender to something like this. Good people in our communities, we get on top of this on our own. You're my community and my class, so take care of each other. Be safe out there. Follow the guidelines. And yeah, if you have any questions, reach out, everybody. Oh, yeah. Flying into COVIDia, otherwise known as Wisconsin and Northern Illinois, not what I'm looking forward to. I probably already said this a million times. I love my dad. Can't wait to see that guy. Yep. Be good people and do good things. Take care of everybody. I'll post this.